Welcome to our ocean studio here as part of the Yahowah blog. This episode will be number 14, I believe, of the Messiah series. This is from Coming Home, Volume 2. And we're going to return to where we were in our last program, which is to the midst of Hosha, the great prophet through whom Yahweh announced the divorce of his people. It is a beautiful day, as you can tell, in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It's lovely to be able to return to our ocean studio. To my back here, a long way across the sea would be where we would enter the Mediterranean through the Straits of Gibraltar and across the sea to Jerusalem. It is a very long way from here, but the voice that God had prepared in the last days would come out of the sea, a very distant land away from Yisra'el. So we're sitting right where we're supposed to be. We are now in the range of only 40 days, maybe even slightly fewer than that, from the fulfillment of Shabuwah. Shabuwah designates the time of Israel's troubles. And as anyone who is listening to this broadcast knows, we have really difficult times for Israel. The President of the United States is Rahab, meaning that he is the egotistical betrayer of the last days, that is Satan incarnate. He is the one that the prophet spoke, saying that he would be particularly evil. He is literally the human incarnation of Satan. Donald Trump is going to turn out to be more destructive, more diabolical than all of the hideous men who've gone before. He's worse than the worst of the pharaohs, worse than Antiochus Epiphanes, worse than Titus Vespasian, worse than any of the Roman emperors, be worse than Hadrian, worse than Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan, worse than the times of Muhammad. And, you know, the first 100 years after Islam was founded, 1/3 of the Earth's population was murdered. About that percentage was robbed and enslaved by the first Muslims, and the consequence of that is still blazoned all over the map, with some 55 nations now under the apartheid control of Islam. So it's going to be worse than this time when Islam was first born 1,400 years ago, 1,300 years ago, with devastation of unimaginable consequence. And Trump is going to be worse even than the modern incarnations of evil, Mao Zedong, Adolf Hitler, and the horrible dictators that were so ruthless in Russia. It is going to be an incredibly difficult time. The book of Zechariah says that 1/3 of the Jewish population that enters the time of trouble will survive it. 2/3 will die. That's some 10 million people, making it worse than the Holocaust. And this is largely because Israel has been fooled by Donald Trump, believing that he and America are Israel's allies, when in fact he is the great betrayer. And it puts Israel in a horrible position, particularly since the United States is desperate to find a way out of the war. It started with Israel in the second attack of Iran, and there is no exit. And so on this day, Trump has dispatched his non-negotiating team. It's a fool's folly. I mean, there's not a single person in the group that has any concept of statecraft and how to be a diplomat. And yet he's sent the circus of 3 buffoons. And the last time they were there, they dishonored what Trump had said. He agreed that he was going to honor and had already negotiated Iran's 10-point plan and agreed to it, which seemed amazing. Since it's apparent now that he never read it, because that would have required the surrender of the United States. He's made a fool of himself by agreeing to that plan and then reneging on his agreement in the last round. And the Iranians said, well, why bother? The man is blackmailing us. He's threatened to literally destroy us, to commit horrendous war crimes if we don't surrender to him after he has bombed so many civilian places across our country. And so they're debating right now whether to even send a team to Pakistan to meet with them. And if I were them, I wouldn't do it. But we'll see how the Iranians respond. But at last we read when Trump threatened the Iranians and said that they had 36 hours to either surrender or that he would wipe the Iranian civilization off the face of the earth, which of course is sadistic and a war crime. The Iranians responded and said, here we're giving the United States notice. They have 36 hours to surrender to Iran, or we will destroy all traces of the United States and its infrastructure in the Middle East. This is a very frightening time that we live in. There is definitely no predicting what the master of chaos will do next, other than make a fool of himself and manage to lie his way into one horrible situation after another. When he, just a few days ago, began by telling us, and the media actually listened to this dribble, that great news, the strait is open and that Iran will never close it again. They will not earn any fee on transit. They have agreed to give the United States all of their enriched uranium, on and on, total surrender. And he said, all of this I can announce to you. It was all a lie. Every word of it was just confabulation. And the media reported it. MAGA swooned. And you wonder, what is it with the world that you just say, wait a minute, what are the odds that that's true? What are the odds that any part of it's true? And the answer is none. And, Trump, just within hours, then began to begrudge the fact that Iran said, no, the straits aren't open. They're open to the extent they've been for some time. If you buy your oil in Chinese yuan, you pay us a transit fee. You're among the good guys, not the bad guys. You can pass. Otherwise, you can't. And then Trump put up his stupid blockade. And, 90% of Iranian oil and gas goes to one customer, China. And the Chinese have moved their fleet, which rivals the United States, into the Persian Gulf. And they're not only escorting Chinese tankers, but for the U.S. to board a Chinese tanker would be an act of war. And the Russians have moved their fleet to the Persian Gulf. And so 100% of the Chinese tankers, which are the only ones that really matter to Iran, are free to go. It doesn't have any effect on Iran, the U.S. blockade, because the U.S. cannot board and manhandle or pirate a Chinese vessel without engaging in an act of war. And the United States, listen, the United States couldn't beat the Houthis. We couldn't beat the Taliban, for crying out loud. We couldn't beat the Viet Cong. We lost to the Viet Cong. We lost to the Taliban. We lost in Iraq. And then we lost to the Houthis. And the U.S. has lost in Iran. How in the hell is the United States going to fight China and Russia? They've already lost to Russia and Ukraine. But desperate people do desperate things. And so there is no accounting for the chaos that Donald Trump will ultimately bring on the world. And of course, the bottom line here is that from a U.S. point of view, the only reason that the U.S. was so vested in this part of the world is that the petrodollar system required America's Navy and Air Force to have copious bases in the Persian Gulf, which the U.S. did. They have now been destroyed. And the U.S. promised to protect the family dictatorships. If the family dictatorships promised to sell all oil and gas denominated in dollars, which is the petrodollar system that enabled the U.S. to accumulate $40 trillion worth of debt and not appear bankrupt and not have runaway inflation as a result. But that system's over. The U.S. betrayed all of those countries. They're going to do everything but sell their oil and gas in dollars. They're not going to welcome the U.S. back. And so it was the most foolish of all circumstances, and it turned Iran into the hegemon of the Middle East because it controls the Strait of Hormuz, and that isn't going to change. So it's quite a mess that Donald Trump has put himself and the United States and the world in. And I share this at the beginning of this program on Messiah, because it is where we are in the text of Hosha. It's God knows his people quite well, and he recognizes that there is literally no place for, excuse me there, Wookie, you need just to sit down and chill. Okay, bud? Sit down and chill. Can't knock non-compliance introvert man down, and you just can't move around to the table. I'm sorry, bud. Okay, there we go. God realizes, knowing his people well, that they're not going to return to him until he is their last option. It's sad in a way, but it is nevertheless true that Israel has stood apart from Yahowah, as has all humankind, for the better part of 3,400 years. From the point of the Exodus, and even before it, in the 500 years before the Exodus, there was total acrimony between the children of Yisra'el and Yahowah. And that worsened during the Exodus, where the entire thing was a hallmark to belligerence and anarchy and antagonism. They were irascible. And they haven't changed from that point on. Finally gotten allowed into the land. There was a very, very brief periods of relationship under a few kings, but primarily under Dowd, and under Dowd only for a portion of his tenure, beginning of Solomon's, and then they were house divided. And even at war with one another, Yisra'el and Yehudim, they were also at war against God. A brief reconciliation for a matter of weeks through Hezekiah, but it didn't last long. And from that time to this time, Jews have been divorced from Yahowah. God in Hosha, and that's the prophet we're studying at the moment, announced his divorce. He said, I'm divorcing Israel because they cheated on me with false gods, which is why he asked Hosha to marry a religious whore, so that he would empathize with what Yahowah had to endure with Israel. So when I say this, Israel is so, Jews are the religious ones are so convinced that, they are the chosen people and that God is protecting them, and that Judaism is the religion of Moshe and Abraham and the Torah. And they were the chosen people, but they didn't choose God in return. And God's divorced himself of Israel. He will return to them when they return to him, but that hasn't happened yet. So they stand apart. And Judaism is the greatest impediment to the relationship. So this is a very bad situation. And God said it's going to continue to be bad until the time of troubles, until the troubles become so deep, so profound, so disastrous that that's the only option. It's obvious that, and it should already be, that the IDF is counterproductive. Look at what happened on October 7th of 23. And that's what's going to happen again, except 1,000-fold. And just over a year's time, that's going to happen again, 1,000-fold. And the IDF is not situated to deal with the combination of rockets and missiles and drones into cities of enormous quantities and millions of jihadists. And that is what's going to occur. And so the IDF cannot be relied upon. The politicians in Israel have destroyed the country. On the left, they divided the country over judicial reform, which was essential in a country that doesn't have a constitution. But yet they preferred anarchy and tearing the country apart than working to reform the judiciary, who has no bounds in Israel because there's no constitution. And on the other side, you have the fruitcakes that are parasites. I don't know if you can be a parasite fruitcake, but they are. The Haredim are nothing but bloodsuckers. They're the worst of the worst. And they are an impediment to the survival of the state of Israel. And then in between, some 50 to 60% of the remaining people have gone very hard line nationalism and patriotism and pound our chest, greater Israel politics, war. And it's backfired. You turn the entire world against you. The Netanyahu regime in Israel has been the worst thing that could have ever happened to that country. And so it's going to be a time when the only thing left for Israel is Yahowah. Politicians will have clearly failed. The IDF will clearly have failed. The rabbis will clearly have failed. That means Yahowah is the only one, and he knows it, and that's why he conveyed this next line through Hosha. Beginning then and there, I am prepared to give to her so that she can approach her vineyards and a vine dresser, her garden and resulting fruit. The vineyard, of course, was planted by Dowd. The vine dresser now happens to be his herald. And the fact is that Yahowah is offering to Israel the one who will cut the dead wood from this rotten and wild vineyard, such that it can be productive again. And it needs pruning in the worst way for if it's ever going to deliver useful fruit again. Then God says, the valley of Achor, which would be Emek, which is a deep depression of Achor. Accordingly, the deep depression, this enormous amount of trouble, profound cunning, and all things that deviate from what is true, such that it is exceedingly disturbing. That this deep depression of trouble is going to be what opens the doorway, La Patak. That'll be the portal to a more expansive and beneficial resolution, the gateway to being liberated, to being free. So it's going to become the open doorway of hope, of confident expectation of a good and beneficial future. Finally, a way to be optimistic and to move forward. Yes, it's going to take that for this door of opportunity to be capitalized upon by Israel, because Israel must return to Yahowah for Yahowah to return to them. So then and there, along with the name is Yahowah. She will respond with the answer. She's going to reply. Finally, in the end, then and there, she will reply and respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she was lifted up and ascended out of the stream, the crucibles of political oppression. Now, here Yahowah had to say day singular because there was a celebration as the Israelites, following Pesach and the morning of Matzah, were freed from religious and political persecution, celebrating Matzah as it was intended. And the Mitzrayim, the Mitzri, the Egyptians were so desirous of having the Hebrews leave on favorable terms so that there were no more plagues. They afforded the Hebrews with all manner of things, with sheep and goats and cattle and objects of gold and silver and clothes and cooking utensils. They left fully stocked as a result of all of this. So they were in great spirits as they finally walked out of Mitzrayim. It didn't last long. Of course, they were Jews. What do you expect? They were belly aching and complaining and saying they wanted to go back to Mitzrayim and be slaves before they even got to the Nuiba beach and the near side of the Gulf of Aqaba. But for that one day, maybe for 2 or 3 days thereafter, they were in great spirits. Israel was responsive, as she will be yet again. And she's going to be responsive on a particular day going forward. It's not going to be matzah this next time. It will be Towrah, when Israel will finally respond and be receptive to God. That is over 7 years from now, the 23rd and 24th of September, 2033. So God is waiting for his children, should they be willing to walk with him and ponder his word at long last, be responsive to him, return to him, shub for shub. But this opportunity, written as it was in the perfect conjugation, will not exist or endure forever. This is your moment, Yisra'el. Seize it. If we were to translate Kippurym as vineyard, then Yahowah is giving Yisra'el access to the one he instructed Dowd to cultivate on Zion, on the ridgeline of Mount Moriah, where the signs are posted along the way for their benefit. And while it has been neglected these past 3,000 years, Yahowah is in the business of restoration and renewal. It will bear fruit again. But it's going to have a vine dresser, and a vine dresser has lopping shears. He's going to prune it way, 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 way back, gunning all the way back to the good wood, which will eliminate all of the wild trindles. It's going to be a lot that is tossed away. Now, if, however, we were to render Kippurym as garden, then the promise is exceptionally wonderful. Yahowah is going to transform the land of Yisra'el and the entire earth back into the conditions experienced in Eden. It will be a gift to his beloved Yehudah on Sukkah, camping out in year 6000 Yah, although the transformation takes place beginning on Towrah. Also interesting, depending on whether we vocalize the SHM as Shem or Sham, we can deduce two different meanings. Vocalized as Shem, it's the name. Well, Sham is a place here and now, for example, and both are relevant. However, before I should say this transformation occurs, the chosen people will have to endure the worst man has to offer. Fortunately, the Amek Akor, the valley or depression of troubles, has a patak, tukwa, a doorway of hope, a reason to have the perception that if you can survive it with the right attitude and the right approach, that there's light at the end of this dark tunnel. So after suffering through 3 millennia of deep depression, resulting from this profoundly cunning religious plot to deviate from what is known about Yahowah, and particularly a devastating 7 years, the children troubles are going to be finally over. Yahowah is providing a portal to a more expansive realm, one without the controlling influence of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Marxism, or conspiracies, even anti-Semitism. We have been given every reason to tikwa, to confidently expect a good and beneficial outcome. We are moving to happily ever after. It's just that it's going to be a nightmare between now and then. It was in Akkor that Akan chose to disregard Yahowah's restriction regarding looting the fallen city of Jericho. And he was stoned as a consequence along with his family. Death was the consequence, the penalty. The name means to create trouble. The Torah was written and fulfilled to provide a host of benefits, among them to make the imperfect not guilty, while opening the doorway to life. And it will be a welcome sight for those struggling to survive what's called the time of Yaakov's troubles, which, as I say, commences in, well, less than 40 days from now on the 22nd of May this year. That is a Shabbat for Shabuwah, 7 years prior to Yahowah's return with Dowd. So as we consider the conclusion of Hosha 2:15, we become aware of why it was important to share the commonality of Asher, Haya, and Yahowah in the discussion with Moshe in advance of his liberation of the chosen people. Remember where Yahowah answered Moshe's question as to who should I tell the children of Yisra'el has sent me to you? And Yahowah began by saying, Haya, first person, but Haya, Asher, Haya. I am who I am to bring this benefits of the relationship. And he then said, my name is Yahowah. That's the only name that I want to be remembered throughout all time. So it was why we discussed that correlation earlier in our previous program. So if we were to synthesize Yahowah's message to his people, it might be conveyed like this. I created you to be part of my family. But even knowing that you'd reject me, I have always been there for you, speaking to you as a father would address his wayward children, or as a devoted husband would speak to an unfaithful wife. Accordingly, I have given you the means to return to me, and will honor it the moment you choose to return and trust me again. Of course, the first step of that is to acknowledge that Yahowah has a name, and it's not Hashem, it's Yahowah. And second, to appreciate what Dowd has done to fulfill the 7 Moedim and to start celebrating them appropriately. Now, the first step in this regard, to respond to and answer Yahowah, replying to him and relying on him to lead the people away from the crucibles of religion and politics, from militarism and economic oppression, is to recognize Yahowah's name, to recognize what his son has achieved by fulfilling the Moedim, to realize where we are on this timeline and to engage accordingly. Yahowah has been calling his people out of the world of men and to himself since really the dawn of recorded time. And now that we are approaching the end of this period, well, it's quite frankly, it's now or never. So just as Yahowah called and led his people out of Mitzrayim, the crucibles of human oppression 3,500 years ago. Today, he is calling Yisra'el out of Babylon, which is the confusing words of humankind, the commingling of religion and politics that we see all around the world, particularly in Israel. The only question which remains is whether or not you and those you love accept his invitation. Now, this leads us to one of the most relevant and insightful revelations in the whole of the Torah, Nabiim wa Mizmor. God says, and it shall be at that specific day, prophetically declares Yahowah, well in advance of it occurring, you shall encounter and welcome me as an individual. And you will not call out to me as Habel, as my husband or my Lord, ever again. Now, this is interesting, and in terms of what is actually said here, there are two words that can be translated husband in Hebrew. The first is ishi, and so this is gives you two options on how you want to render this. But the fact is that we begin with the first part, and the first part says there will be a specific day. Now, that specific day happens to be Yom Kippurym. So there is a day for certain, prophetically declares Yahowah, that you're not going to encounter and welcome me as an individual. And that day happens to be Kippurym because that's the day that Dowd is returning with Yahowah. And when Dowd returns with Yahowah, the individual with whom all humans are going to encounter and engage, welcome, if you will, be called out, is through Dowd. God says in the 89th Mizmor that Dowd is returning as Elyon. He is all things pertaining to the influence of God. So we don't need to call Yahowah as an individual at that point, because God's going to continue to do as he has done, which is to communicate through a man of his choosing. And the man of his choosing is Dowd, the returning king and Messiah, his firstborn son. Now, the other way you can look at this is Ishe, well, it is rendered as an individual or a man, Ish, 99% of the time that is used, very common word in Hebrew, Ish, individual man. It is occasionally rendered as husband. And it typically isn't rendered as husband unless you've gone out of the way of talking about two people who are presented as married and they're husband and wife. But Isha is the Hebrew word for woman that is rendered woman almost all the time, that on occasion can be rendered wife just because of the context, but it's still just woman, just as Ish is just man. But in the case, since Baal means husband and Lord, we could be dealing with the two Hebrew words for husband, with Ish being, you will not refer to me as a husband any longer. And the Ishe is the softer form of husband. It is just as a man would be to a woman. And the reason that would be the case is that Yahowah and Hosha divorced Israel. And because of he divorced for religious infidelity. But because Yahowah divorced Israel, he can't remarry Israel according to the Torah, nor does he want to. That is how he is going to engage and why he is going to engage through Dowd. There's going to be a wedding ceremony that takes place on Kippurym during the great homecoming. And it's Dowd who is the groom that is so desirous of this and getting a bride that's cleansed and perfected, purged of her religious and other forms of guilt via the prophecy that's presented in Numbers 5. That is the purpose of what's called the adulterous woman. It's Dowd that is the groom, and it is His bride is Yisra'el. And so it's Dowd that's going to be the husband at that point. And because of the divorce, God will never be the Baal again of Yisrael. Now he spoke in Yirmiyah that he said in Yirmiyah 31, he said, I had been your Baal, I had been your husband, but I'm not anymore. And he divorced you, and he's not going to remarry you. But the fact of the matter is that Dowd will marry you. And so this is as much to say that Israel isn't going to refer to Yahowah as Baal the Lord, which is the other meaning of Baal, as it is to say that Israel is not going to refer to Yahowah as husband of the covenant, because quite frankly, he now has a groom. His beloved son is going to be the one who marries a cleansed Israel. That's the story of the Adam Parah in Numbers 19, and the story of Numbers 5 and the adulterous woman. So it's a very profound prophetic statement. Either way, it is true. Either way, it is important. Both ways happen to be true, and you can choose which way you wish to view it. So one of the most appealing aspects of Yahweh's character, and indeed his connection with his creation, is that he is always within our reach, so long as we extend a hand to him in accordance with the instructions that he has provided. So God is approachable as an individual. Although his purpose is for us to approach him through an individual, and that individual going forward is Dowd. And quite frankly, I've wondered how I was going to share this with you, but I think maybe now is time. When Adam, who is Dowd's soul, so the firstborn of Yahweh, the first person that Yahweh gave a neshama to, and created as his father is Adam, who is Dowd, his firstborn. And while Dowd did not measure up in the garden, he wasn't a complete failure either. There was hope for him, and he would give many more opportunities, and ultimately Dowd came through. So the problem wasn't Adam/Dowd in the garden. The real problem was that mankind can be good or bad individually, but we are almost always bad collectively. And what God foresaw is that when he gave man, woman, and there were two, as opposed to him just relating to one, it went south in a hurry. The man who had not been particularly good at listening to Yahweh, responding to him, who hadn't engaged to make any contribution to the relationship, was quite lethargic, and who proved unreliable, that was resolvable given time. He could fix that man, given putting him out of the house and having him over time have some proper parenting and some proper instructions. He would get Dowd resolved, and he did. Dowd became the greatest of men. The problem is that when Dowd was with Adam, was with his woman, Chawa, they turned against God. And they pursued some nefarious goals. She wanted to become a goddess. And they felt at liberty to not only corrupt the word of God, but take no responsibility around God. And what God saw was that the humans who were given the Nesama, passed on through Adam and Chawa, collectively became a nightmare. They were horrendous. A significant number of people together are bad. I mean, really bad. It's why he refers to them as the Nephilim, those who have fallen. They have fallen away from God. They have fallen beneath any level of hope. And by fallen, that's the fall of man. It's what took place outside the garden. The fall, we fell all over ourselves. And what God has witnessed since that time is that it's only individuals, and in very rare circumstances, that an individual shows the capacity to be good. Chinook did as an individual. Noach and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives did as individuals. Against a whole world of fallen people, 8 people stood out because of the one, Noach. When it comes time for God to lay down the terms and conditions of the covenant, he found one person. He wasn't particularly good, but he wasn't nearly as bad as the collective atrocities of Babel with their integration of religion and politics. He had walked away from it. And those 2 were redeemable. And those 2 had a son that was, neither all that good or all that bad, and he was played in the end. And, he had 2 sons as opposed to 1 son, and it went downhill there. 1 son was workable, 2 sons, and one of the 2 was horrible, and the other wasn't very good. Esau was terrible, and Jacob wasn't really very good either. And then, Yishak, through 4 women, has 12 sons, and they're terrible. I mean, there's only one of them that turned out to be a decent human being, Joseph, and that's the one they sold off to slavery. So the more, the worse. I've constantly shared on these programs that individual men and women have the capacity to be good or bad, although they tend to be bad. But collectivized men and women are always bad. Gang mentality always sets in. The story of civilization is the story of abominations. I've watched a series here recently on how the Roman Catholic Church's emissaries came into the New World. And the tribes that they encountered, they slaughtered. 90% of the inhabitants of the Americas died within the first 100 years of inception of these religious conquerors. 90%. And when you see what the Aztecs and the Incas and the Mayas were doing, it was just revolting. Human sacrifice was hugely important in their lives. They were vicious, they were savages. And the people who conquered them were vicious savages, representing the Roman Catholic Church. And the emergence of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is the story of the worst of humanity. Humans have never been as bad as they were under those 3 religions. Marxism is the religion of man, and it has been as deadly as the others. Collectivized man is horrendous. That when there was a nation of Israel, they were always bad. And the same thing is true with Yahowah. And then you look at the civilizations of the old world, and it was nothing but war and conquest and enslaving people, rape and robbery and plunder and military abuse. Look at what happened with Kublai Khan and Genghis Khan, his father, and the Golden Horde. And it's hard to imagine viciousness at that scale. But, look at the first 100 years of Islam. A third of the Earth's population at the time, 200 million people, slaughtered. Another 200 million people, bludgeoned and persecuted and subject to apartheid and raped and robbed, slaved. Humanity, when there's a lot of us, even when there's a number of us, small groups, we're bad. I mean, look at, some 25 years ago, I began to speak, and we gradually accumulated people who called themselves part of the covenant family. And a number of those people turned out to be rotten, and they together are even more rotten than the individuals were individually. Every family that there is and the Torah and prophets was fractured, always. So I'm telling you the story because as God peered out and looked at this social being that he created for relationship, we're really bad at it as humans. Terrible. Whether it's political parties, religious institutions, nations, empires, whatever, gangs, large corporations, whatever we do in large quantity, we do poorly. We're miserable. So I'm here to tell you that God doesn't want a lot of us to be part of the remaining two harvests. Because if there were a lot of us, he'd be back to the same nightmare. It's going to be a small group. Just is. And the remnant of Yisra'el is also going to be a small group. Now, larger than the harvest, and we have 1,000 years and ideal conditions with the perfect teachers and exemplars to guide them. But even then, there will be challenges, and humankind is just not designed to be good collectively. So it's important for you to know that the gods of religions that are popular have nothing to do with the God. The God of Christianity is not God. The God of Islam is not God. The God of Judaism is not God. The gods of Hinduism are not God. Man, being the God of Marxism, is not God. The God of MAGA, he ain't God either. If you're popular, you're part of anything that's popular, you're on the wrong track. Important for you to know that. God makes no apology for it. He would have been happy with Dowd had that relationship worked. It just didn't at that time. It took 6,000 years to get it right. But his view is that if there are 80 or 800 or even 8,000 out of the billions upon billions of humans who have come this way and gone, that will be ample. So we need to recognize that while God is approachable as an individual, he wants us to approach him as an individual, not collectively. We can relate to him as a father and the covenant as a family, but this is not a large family. Now, affirming this here, there are overtures of husband and wife, while elsewhere God presents himself as our shepherd and as our father. We are his sheep. But this is not a large flock, and it's important, again, for you to know that's the case. So, let me take care of my dog. You can't be here, Wookie, if you're going to be all itchy. Sorry, cat. Wookie's just walking away. Yep, I don't want to be told what I can do and what I can't do. So here we are, and it's important that you know that God is trying to filter those who belong with him out. And that's it's quite a task. So, going back to where we were in the text, is that this takes us to a place that very few people had ever thought. That, well, the covenant is a family, and families begin when a man and a woman become husband and wife and have children. There really is no definition of what makes someone a husband or a wife in the Torah, other than we can model the conditions found in the covenant if we want it to be good. So, just another example would be when God speaks of adultery and that trust being eroded. It doesn't have anything to do with a person cheating on a husband or a wife. It has all to do with the person cheating on God with false gods. An adulterous woman isn't adulterous because she cheated on her husband, but because she cheated on God. And she represents Israel. And so God he loved being considered the husband of the covenant family. He loved being considered the father of the covenant family. These are things that he enjoyed, but he'll never be a husband of the covenant family again. And he would prefer not to be Lord of the covenant family. He would prefer that Dowd become the husband and become the primary individual through whom we communicate. God says, "For I will remove, accordingly, the names of the Balaam out of her mouth." It doesn't say that he is going to remove the Balaam, but the names of the Balaam. So what he's talking about is the people that we as humans have created as lords, like the Lord Jesus Christ. Perfect example. The Lord, it's funny in Hebrew, the rabbis sold Muhammad a bag of tricks. So the word for Lord in the Quran is Rab. So my Lord becomes Rabbi and in the Quran. Muhammad's, they bought almost all of his statements that have anything to do with the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, any mention of any of the characters in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, which fill the last half of the Quran, that chronologically anyway. Those are all Talmud recitals that he bought from rabbis, and the Lord is part of that. But it's the name of the gods that we refer to as the Lord, and that was true of most pagan religions. The Lord becomes their god. It was true with the Phoenicians in this area, the Canaanites in this area referred to their god as Baal, the Lord. And so it is all of these religions in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Their god is called a Lord. So the names of the lords would be, they would have to be eliminated, are Jesus, Allah, and Hashem. They're gone. That's what he's saying here. And they will not be remembered or recalled or mentioned anymore. They will not be proclaimed, their names, ever again by those names. That doesn't mean you're never going to hear Lord again. It's a sign of respect. Dowd uses it. Moshe used it in referring to Yahweh, usually by a variation of Edon, meaning as Adon. Can mean upright pillar, my foundation, or just a sign of respect, and is a Lord, like we would say sir, is the way it was used. But we're not going to refer to Yahweh as the husband of the covenant. That's going to be Dowd. And the one who is going to rule over the people is not going to be Yahweh. It's going to be Dowd. The hierarchy is Yahweh's God. Dowd reports to Yahweh. God has given Dowd, when he returns, um, complete authority. He is Elion, all things pertaining to the influence of God, when he returns. And then Dowd's going to have a staff under him that report to him and carry out his edicts. And then you have the children of Yisra'el, who is this mortal remnant. Um, and in between those two, you'll have the covenant members who have been harvested up to this point. And then beneath them, you'll have the Goyim who have been allowed into the millennial Shabbat of Sukkah because of their attitudes and aptitudes. That's the pecking order that's going forward. And ultimately, at the end of the celebration of Sukkah, the 1,000 years, everybody is going to be covenant. Where that order of authority, if you will not be necessary, because God's going to be very careful, and those who he elevates from 3 to 7 dimensions and empowers so that they can travel through the universe and time with him will all have been vetted and have shown that they can be trusted with this level of responsibility. So if you were of the opinion that Yahweh does not care what you call him, or what anyone else refers to him as, you'd be dead wrong. If you're the opinion that God is happy being called the Lord Jesus Christ or the Lord Allah or the Lord Hashem, you'd be dead wrong. That just isn't something that God can tolerate. And we are going to have to find out what we can do with our mouse, because the scrolling is just not working. We're going pages up and pages down with a single move. So I'm going to try to make it through this program. When it comes to the translations of the text and the amplified format that we use, I try to read them and comment on them as accurately and completely as is possible, and deduce the insights that I'm sharing with you from them. And so we use a teleprompter, which you've probably seen when the roving camera on a track. It pans the ocean and comes in and gives you a view of the studio that we sit in. So you get a way of kind of seeing where we're set and how this is working here. And I can look at the camera that's going up there, or here in this camera, or the one that's over there. So we have lots of ways to capture the scene here as we present these programs as live streams. But it is helpful to be able to have the text to share with you. I spent a lot of time rendering these translations, and they're the heart of the soul of the 35 books that are available for you to read at yahowah.com, all free, yahowah.com. In fact, go there and you'll see that these vlogs now are appearing by topic in chronological order. I think there's some 600 of them now available to you on the site, in addition to the basics, and in addition to the blog, where we have updates on all things pertaining to the news, in addition to all of the communication functions that we have on the blog, the vlog, the music, the invites. Every page on the site has a way that you can comment on it and share insights and direct message individuals. It's really a very comprehensive suite of family offerings now that are available, including the Dead Sea Scrolls and a translation presentation of everything we've done up to this point, and a timeline of where we have been all the way along and where we're going. It's all there for your purview. So this next read says, I will cut for them to approach a family-oriented covenant in that specific day with all living things in the environment, and in harmony with the winged creatures of the spiritual realm and the creatures that move about on the earth. God is a fan of life, and when he cuts this covenant with us as we are led back into the garden with the mortal remnant. Now, at this point, the covenant members who have been harvested on Kippurym, Shabuwah, and Towrah are not going to be cut into the covenant again. They're already cut in. But on Sukkah, following the celebration and sacrifice of Towrah and the homecoming of Kippurym, beginning where we return to the garden on Sukkah, the mortal remnant is going to have a covenant cut with them as they enter the garden for 1,000 years to prepare to be emancipated from this planet. And that is when God's going to cut the covenant for them on that specific day, and that is going to be Sukkah. And it is at that time that all living things are integrated into this. Birds of the air and creatures of the land. We're all in a covenant of life at that point. And I think part of the reason, too, is that God rather likes animals. And, this Nasalma thing with humans, it only worked out to some degree. And going forward, I don't think that that eternity is going to be bereft of, well, Wookiee, you're going to have to do a little better job, pal. No, just kidding, on making it through the podcast. No, I'm just kidding. The fact is that Yahowah loves animals. And our future in the Garden of Eden as we return is going to be replete with all manner of life forms. And this is one of the many statements that is made that affirms that that's the case. If you think it's only human souls that get to move forward, no. Animals too. In fact, I'd say today, animals are better than most people. Now, I know most people are animals, but they're not very good animals. Religious and political, anti-Semitic, conspiratorial, Marxist and Christian, Muslim, Haredim, men and women are worse than most animals. God then says, then the bow, the sword of war, I will break and abolish. I will do so from the earth, making it possible for you to lay down and rest securely and confidently. This last war is going to be hellacious. As Muslims, mainly from Iran, but they will meet in Yisra'el, and I think there'll be in the range of 4 million militants from Iran that are going to enter Israel. And in addition, there will be militants and armies from Turkey coming through Syria and Egypt coming through Gaza. It's going to be a horrible situation of Islam claiming Israel at the end. And so the world will need a break from war. And God is saying, I'm going to create it for you. All militants are going to be extinguished. Their weapons and the host of those weapons are going to be turned to goo. So at this point, when we return to the garden, we're going to live securely and confidently, safely, in complete trust. That is the whole idea of the garden. It's a safe place to reside where we can rely upon and trust Yahowah. That was Hosha 2:18. So Yahowah uses karat to cut in association with his Bereth covenant for a number of reasons. Some are cut in and others are cut out. To be the family, one has to cut ties with the family of man, and therefore with the covenant is about separation, which leads to the inclusion of some and the exclusion of others. Moreover, karat serves to reinforce why circumcision remains the sign of the covenant, as something is cut off, right? And while the bereth is karat many times, it is never replaced, and it is never two. And the only one time that it changes, the difference is especially telling. When the covenant is renewed, as it is being foretold here with Yahowah, upon his return, his Torah guidance will be incorporated into our lives by choice and integrated into our very soul so that it serves as a means to guide our inclinations and actions and decisions. So now on this occasion, there is something wonderful afoot. All living creatures are going to live in harmony. Life is going to be celebrated as it was in Eden. Personally speaking, this makes my heart sing because I enjoy the magnificence of life and all of its colors and all of its complexities. And I'm just excited that it will no longer be red and tooth and claw. This is something that's also explained in Yahowah in the 11th chapter regarding the Towrah. It's going to be a different kind of an environment in the garden going forward. And the garden is going to be much of the earth. So reconciliation is about bringing harmony back into the relationship. This will occur in the millennium, the seventh day, the 1,000-year Shabbat that follows the time of Jacob's troubles and the restoration of Yisra'el and Yehudah. Therefore, this prophecy pertains to Dowd as Hamashiach returning 10 days after the earth has been restored and his people have been purged of their religious guilt for their attendance at the great homecoming and wedding. It complements the opening of Yahowah, Isaiah 11, as you know, where we're told that the result of a man from Yishai's lineage with the spirit of Yahowah residing on him. And this is a man that stands in lieu of Yishai as literally as a father figure to Dowd going forward, that all of the earth is going to live in peace, worry-free, and free of conflict as a result of how these two men, the Towrah and the Messiah, work together. Now, even the animals will get a reprieve from the weapons mankind has leveled at them. There'll be no more trophy hunting. And this suggests that our return to Eden is going to be universally joyous. And so that it will be harmonious, Yahowah confirms that he cannot himself remarry Israel, but he will certainly be the father of the groom at the wedding, and it's going to be replete with all of the trimmings. And so God is going to, and this is kind of an interesting thing, he is going to become betrothed to you and unto me. We're going to become as if we are engaging in a marriage, because that is what the covenant is all about, although it's actually going to be conducted on behalf of Dowd. So, and I will become betrothed to you and you to me. This is wa aras ata la ani. I will pledge to marry you. The pledge is through Dowd. And this covenant marriage, if you will be forever. So tangibly in the big picture, we're wed to God in the covenant. Technically, as it relates to the marriage that is going to be celebrated on this day, it's between Dowd and a very beautiful, pure, marvelous, bright Yisraelite. So it says, I will become engaged for you to approach me. Well, God clearly is going to engage on our behalf for us to approach him. It is in a manner that is honest, correct, rightful, and upright through the exercise of good judgment by making the most informed and rational decision regarding the means to resolve the ongoing dispute with unfailing kindness, genuine mercy, unrelenting favor, and loyal love, in addition to compassion. Hosha 2:19. Then I will betroth you unto me, engaging with you, so that you can approach me. I will engage with you really is the idea that is being communicated. Uh, it isn't that Yahowah is marrying Yisrael. It is that the covenant is being reestablished as a marriage, and that's the collective umbrella, and God is going to engage to make that happen. And that the actual wedding that cements all of this, that we will celebrate as the metaphor for all of this, is going to be between Dowd and a beautiful Yisraelite. And this is going to be done. God says that I'm going to engage so that you can approach me in a steadfast and trustworthy manner. And he says, and then you will Yahowah. You will know and acknowledge Yahowah. This is just as the title of the books that you see behind me. Yahowah. You will become familiar with, respect, and acknowledge Yahowah. I'm delighted that God has chosen to feature the books of Yahowah as the means for him to restore his relationship with Yisra'el. And that is precisely what this says. And, I don't feel like I have done enough to be put in that situation. But then again, if you look at the Yahowah series, it's 25,000 pages, 35 books. I'm working on the concluding 2 for Coming Home now. Very far along in that process. You recognize that I've written more about what Yahowah had to say in his Torah and prophets than all of his other prophets combined. I have delivered more insights to you about who God is, what he's offering, and what he expects in return than all of the other prophets combined. I presented Yah's testimony in an amplified format for you to consider, with the words individually displayed, so that you can verify God's testimony for yourself and go well beyond just knowing and transitioning all the way to understanding, which is vastly more powerful. I reintroduced Yahowah's name after it had not been spoken for more than 25 centuries in the Yahowah series. I reestablished the reputation of Dowd as the firstborn. Delineated the 5 terms and conditions of the covenant. Reestablished the Moedim as the central map that tells us how we can travel from our world and into God's home. And so while I realize that I've made my share of mistakes, and I have taken me 25 years to get to this point, and I'm now learning at the most prodigious pace up to this point, I realize that there's nothing else like this. There's no one else who has invested this degree of time, this amount of effort, and delivered this result. And the result is Yahowah and the Yahowah blog and everything you now experience at yahowah.com. And while it is infinitely inferior to God's intellect and communication capacity, God nonetheless views it as the most superior result that mankind has yet offered on his behalf and on behalf of his people. And so going forward for the next 1,000 years, it's Yahowah. Now, I feel somewhat comforted by the fact that hopefully I'll have another 14 months to make the presentation more complete. I would really like to finish another 2 or 3 coming home in this series and bring it all home to you, so that I'm comfortable that we've done what we should, that we have faithfully excoriated Islam and Christianity and Judaism to clear the obstacles away for understanding who Yahowah is and what he is offering and what he accomplished through his beloved son, Dowd. I'm confident we have done that, and we've done that well. And I'm very comfortable that we understand the full picture, what God is trying to achieve and how he has gone about achieving it over these last 6,000 years. But it hasn't all materialized in written or verbal form. And so I'm looking forward to having another 14 months to be able to complete these books, get them on the shelf at yahowah.com. And I hope to use the 2 to 3 year working vacation we'll have from, hopefully it's Shabuwah, 14 months from now, the 11th of June of 2027, through Passover in year 2030, the midpoint of this terrible time of trouble, that I will return. And my hope is that I'm able to use that time to improve the existing books, add whatever I've missed along the way, correct whatever I might have gotten wrong along the way, and have a really formidable library that even Yahowah can be proud of. And I think Yahowah's already proud of what we've accomplished. We've done more on behalf of his people and his name and his son than really all others up to this point combined. And for that, Yahowah is saying that the future is going to be under the umbrella of Yahowah. And my commitment is to use the time that we have to make it, that library, as accurate, comprehensive, and as appealing and beneficial as is absolutely possible. I'm expecting that even when we enter the millennial Shabbat, that I will continue to study, learn, and share, hopefully both in writing and in the Yahowah vlog, going forward for all of those who've entered the millennial Shabbat, and that the message is still going to be broadcast and written under the umbrella of Yahowah, on behalf of that mortal remnant, even on behalf of the covenant members who are going to want to continue to grow and be even more effective as exemplars and teachers and guides during that 1,000 years, and such that when we are released from this planet with Yahowah and we explore the universe, we are interesting conversationalists, that we are everything that God could envision of a son or daughter, a companion, a traveling companion. And that's the purpose. So when he told you, told me, told his people, that at the end of the time of troubles, when the covenant is restored, that Dowd is reestablished, and he's married again to Yisra'el, the most beautiful woman that Israel has ever offered, the brightest, that we will Yahowah. It's a lot of responsibility, and I hope to meet God's expectation. We've certainly done the best we could do over the last 25 years. We have a lot of time yet remaining to do it as well as we can, and God has certainly provided a marvelous team supporting this effort at this point. And for that, I'm enormously grateful. And I look forward to serving him and his beloved son, and working with every covenant member on behalf of this mortal remnant going forward. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in. That was Fetch. Gotta run now. Catch Yao on our next podcast.